lifestyle all the way around. I did not take a conventional route. I'm sure my life would have turned out very differently if I had. I had the courage and confidence in myself to forge my own way. Traits I attribute to growing up in a very unique situation in the middle of the woods, among innovative architecture, surrounded by nature and beauty. My mom was born in Heilbronn, Germany, in 1918. She wanted to become a children's doctor, pediatrician, but ended up getting caught up in Nazi Germany and was lucky enough that she did get out very, very late in 1938, but she did get out luckily. She moved to England. She was there for 10 years. She was not a conventional American mom. I don't think she even knew what peanut butter and jelly was before she came to the United States. And we ate a lot of German kind of food and stuff. But she was very involved and she was very evolved. And she was very interested in crafts. So we ended up having to make all our gifts and we made things like candles. We made decoupage, like covering waste paper baskets to give as gifts for Christmas. All kinds of sewing, ceramics. We had a pottery wheel in our basement. Most people have no idea what they want to be when they grow up, but I knew from the very start that I wanted to be an artist. My mom was interested in early childhood education and found a kind of a pilot program at Sarah Lawrence College. This is outside of New York City. And so I went to university before nursery school, and I thought that was sort of typical of my unconventional life. This is my dad. He was born in 1922 in the Bronx, but raised in Brooklyn. And at 16, he enrolled in Pratt Institute. He also was very interested in art. Sadly, his dad died when he was 16, and his father was a furniture designer. So he ended up having to take over his father's job. Even though he couldn't drive yet, and he had the Pennsylvania territory, he ended up taking over that job because he needed to support his mom and his much younger brother. That quashed his dream of becoming a painter and sculptor. But he found a way anyway, using his creative skills to become a prominent mid-century modern furniture designer. Most people in his profession would have designed for Herman Miller or Knoll and just collected royalties. But my dad was very entrepreneurial and he was an out-of-the-box thinker. He ended up designing, manufacturing, and retailing all on his own. At the height of his career, he had 6 stores up and down the East Coast. I think I'm probably a little bit prejudiced, but I think his designs are some of the most beautiful of that mid-century period. And his work is actually still available today as part of a website called Smilow Design. That sofa, for example, can sit in the middle of the room. The back is finished. Anyway, I love his stuff a lot. At the height of his career, I said he had 6 successful furniture stores. And up and down like Washington, D.C., Manhattan, White Plains, Plainfield, New Jersey, Manhasset, Long Island. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Frank Lloyd Wright. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard of Frank Lloyd Wright, probably the most foremost architect of our time. I think he really was a true revolutionary, way ahead of his time. Here are 2 of his most iconic buildings, the Guggenheim Museum on the left, and I thought that was just the most perfect design for a museum. So many times we go into a museum and we don't know, should we turn to the left or the right, or have we seen this and what's the chronology? Well, he designed it so that you walk in, you take an elevator to the top, and then you gently stroll down, and the art was all on the outside walls. Sadly, typical America a little bit, where we make cups that don't hold water, they changed. Some of the curators decided that it would be smart to start the exhibit at the bottom and then walk up. And every time I go in there, it gets me mad. I think that Frank Lloyd Wright is probably rolling over in his grave about that too. On the right is Falling Water. That's probably his most famous residential building. It's in Mill Run, Pennsylvania. And you can see how he has really made these homes fit into nature. In everything he undertook, the goal of enhancing and elevating the human experience was always on Wright's mind. To his way of thinking, any building, if properly designed, could be a temple. Here are some other examples of his residential buildings. You can see he uses indigenous stone. The wood is usually just from around the area as well. And a lot of built-in furniture as well. We'll take a little bit look at that afterwards. You know, it's interesting because I was yesterday up in the villas up here. I went to visit somebody's home up there, and they're really beautiful homes up there, and they really do fit into nature, very much in the philosophy of Frank Lloyd Wright. So anyway, I thought that was fun. So a huge contributing factor to my life was a magical place that I grew up called Usonia. It was an unconventional cooperative community, the only fully realized Frank Lloyd Wright community in the world. It was anything but a traditional place. Located 45 minutes north of New York City, it consisted of 47 families who wanted to live outside of the city, but were not interested in the traditional suburban model. They were after a more close-knit community with more interesting, innovative architecture, an alternative to the boxy suburban tract houses of the time. Here's a map of the layout of the community. Frank Lloyd Wright actually was approached by one of his disciples and asked to go in to design this community, and he came and he sat down with a compass and drew circular plots. So of course there's a lot of adjoining land, which was something he wanted. And it's kind of the opposite of Robert Frost's quote, "Good fences make good neighbors." In Usonia, fences were not allowed. There's Frank Lloyd right there in the hat. And then these are other architects that took part in Usonia. Aaron Resnick, the one on his right there, was the designer of the house I grew up in. Here are some other houses. This is the Risley house. In a few minutes, you'll meet Roland Risley, and he is the eldest community member who's still alive. This is my favorite Frank Lloyd Wright house. This was the house across the street from me that I used to see on the way to the bus stop. You can see again the stone is from the area. That's the front of the house, the slide on the left. The carport, let's see if I can use this pointer here. Maybe it doesn't work. Oh yeah, here. That's the carport. And then this is the front door back here. So you go in here, and then the room is on the left side is the room. That's one big circle. So that's the living room here. Sorry. How do I do this? That's the living room here, and then it goes into the kitchen area, and then comes around. And then there's a spiral staircase that goes up to these bedrooms upstairs that were kind of pie-shaped. Some people say coffin-shaped. And they were designed to be very small because he was interested in the social aspects of it, that people would gather around a hearth downstairs. They wouldn't, like nowadays when they make these McMansions, they have all these, you know, the kids are in the other level in the basement with their own playroom and everything. Well, here he wanted everyone of the family to be integrated. So he wasn't just an architect thinking about how the building was built, but also very much the social aspects of it. This is the house where I grew up. You can see it in different seasons. Underneath is a carport, two-car carport. The whole house is on stilts. Well, no, sorry, that's not true. The house, this end is on stilts. The rest is built into the land, which was also typical. He wanted things to fit into the land rather than obstruct it. And there's a deck that goes around the whole house, and every room has at least one door to the outside. That's the living room. Another thing about it is he designed big spaces so that this is a living room, dining room combined. Very open spaces. That's my dad's furniture in there, and then his paintings and sculpture as well. So in addition to growing up in nature and surrounded by this gorgeous architecture, what had even a bigger lasting effect on me was the social aspects. I had the love and support of many parental figures. Everyone was on a first name basis, and this was in the early 60s, late 50s. I remember my friends would come over to play or whatever, and they just couldn't call my parents Mel and Edith. They were like uncomfortable without saying Mr. or Mrs., but my parents kind of insisted, and I think a lot of Usonians did, to be called by their first name. I felt comfortable walking into anyone's house and grabbing a cookie out of a cookie jar or a drink out of the refrigerator. I could go on and on about the community. It's really one of my favorite subjects. But I think what I'll do now is play a small video that we made of the community. We were hoping that maybe one day we're going to make a documentary about the community. And so we made this, quote, little kind of trailer. And I'm going to play that for you. It's just a short thing.
Majority of us who grew up here really feel like we totally won the lottery. We just had the most perfect childhood.
When you live in some place like this that's so simple, so connected to nature, you know, we see the same here every morning, the sense of community and history that people have here, it's just special.
How Usonia get started altogether is an interesting story. A young engineer in New York and some of his friends had a pipe dream. Wouldn't it be wonderful if someday we could build homes for ourselves in the country? In, I think, January 1943, he reports that he had asked Mr. Wright whether he'd be willing to help him to create a community of affordable houses back in the East. And Wright said, yes, he'd very much like to. Go back, get some land, get some money, and I'll work with you. Let's form an organization to do this. So they announced that they're going to build affordable houses in a cooperative community, supervised by Frank Lloyd Wright. In April 1947, Mr. Wright sent back a proposed site plan. The then great Frank Lloyd Wright had designed this community with circular exits. Who ever heard of such a thing? When you joined Usonia, you selected an architect, the architect to be Frank Lloyd Wright or one of his disciples.
So you're building this house, you're 28 years old, whatever, all right? And you come into this community, and it's, in a way, it was experimental. But not just the concept, but the house itself was an experiment. So what was it like as an individual to take all the money in and to agree to an architect, okay, go ahead and build and stay, knowing that there are all these things that the architect's gonna try that have never been done before. Right? I mean, really, who would buy a house or take all their money into something these days? You would look at the architect and say, are you crazy?
Original people who founded this community, I mean, they were true pioneers.
Yeah.
They really were in the late 40s, early 50s. And they built this community with their hands, and it was a risk at the time to do something this wild and different.
A lot of people here walk the walk. You know, they did what they believed in.
All went in groups, and it all went into anybody's house. No houses were locked, and we wandered. And if we saw something we liked, we ate it. And this was just the way we behaved.
Everyone knew you, so it would be like, you know, you could just pop in anywhere and say, hey, you know, I just tripped with Val or or hey, I'm really hungry, or what do you have to eat? I don't like what we're packing for dinner. I always knew the adults by their first names. It was never Mr. or Mrs. And that was huge. And you felt it was very unique. And I always felt that the adults really cared about me as a kid. And that was huge.
It was really a mud hole. It was a gigantic mud hole with 2 rows.
And the lifeguard would every now and then yell, "Snake!" And everybody would have to leave the pool, and there would be a snake.
I think a lot of people who grew up here have soared in their careers and in the paths that they've taken. And I think that is in large part due to how everyone was encouraged to pursue their passions.
Really where it starts, right? It would start with the parents and it start being the community, but I think as part of that is the expectation is to think out of the box. And therefore that affected my entire life.
And I do believe the confidence, right, that was instilled in all of us by being in a nurturing community. Helped me succeed and believe that I could do what I set out to do.
The aesthetics of living here really spoil you for the rest of your life.
The second I drove up that street and had mom, I knew that I wanted to be here.
You become part, the house becomes part of you, and it, you somebody has a beating heart.
People say to me, well, you're 99, you don't look 99. Many years ago, I had an epiphany. I realized one day, that not a day of my life I didn't see something beautiful here. Maybe it's the light off the stone, maybe I'm up lying on the floor doing exercises. I'm looking at the granular wood or the way it's joined. I said, isn't that beautiful? The neuroscientists say that living with a sense of beauty for many years reduces stress. And reducing stress can have physiological benefits, perhaps even longevity. So I have to speculate that I don't look my age because of the beauty of my habit.
Just a little aside, I am still in touch with everybody that I grew up with, more or less. In fact, 3 nights ago, Peter Siegel, the guy with the turquoise shirt that was talking, I had dinner with him I was just in Denver, and I just had dinner with him. And I'm about to go see Irene, who was in the beginning of the film talking about how we won the lottery. I go out and stay with her, and she was my babysitter. And her husband, they were the only couple that got married together from Usonians. And he was the lifeguard, and he taught me yoga when I was like 10 years old. And she still brushes my hair. I sit on the floor, and it's like heaven. I can't wait to get up there. Anyway, now I'm going to talk a little bit about my evolution as a painter. And even though I was sure I was going to pursue a career in art, I didn't take a conventional route of going to an art school. I always was motivated to do art on my own, and I thought I better learn something that I wouldn't be so motivated to learn on my own. So I just took whatever I wanted to. I went to University of Michigan, and I ended up with a BA in French because I went to school for a year in France. So that was sort of accidental, but that's what I ended up doing. And I ended up oftentimes, whenever I could, convince my academic teachers to take art projects instead of papers, which happened. I mean, they let me do it sometimes. Here's some of my really early works from high school. I did a lot of black and white at that point. Now I do a lot more color, but at the beginning I was kind of afraid of color, I'd say. Here's some other earlier works, collage on the left, and then this, I was sort of, my dad was very influenced by Japanese design, and I too was in a way, because of him. This is one of his first series I did, one of my first shows in Ann Arbor, was a series of sleeping women, and that was one of that series. Then after college, I had gone for a year in France, and I liked learning languages, so I ended up moving to Spain, thinking I would learn Spanish, which would be more useful than French. And I ended up getting there and realizing, I picked Barcelona and realized they don't really speak Spanish there, they speak Catalan. So, but they do speak Spanish too, but it was right at the resurgence, right after Franco died. My dad would not let me go there when Franco was still alive. So this was really a beautiful time to be in Barcelona because there was such a resurgence of Catalan culture. And even though I learned Spanish there, I ended up learning Catalan, not by trying at all, but just, that's how a kid learns a language. You just hear it, and you kind of know when to do the context. And after 5 years, I ended up speaking Catalan also. I always like to show in unconventional places. I like, like a jazz club or a hip hair salon or a school. I was never comfortable in the gallery world, sort of an anti-snob, and it was just too sterile and pristine for me, and I realized that if I show in a more unconventional place, a lot more people will see my work. These are some early pieces. I did a lot of palm trees because there were a lot of palm trees in Barcelona, and for a New Yorker, that was very exotic. Miro influenced, I think this is a piece. I don't know where this is anymore, this piece, but it had dimensionality to it that was like a wire coming off of it. It's heavily influenced by Miro, I think. And I even got lucky and I got a painting on the cover of an art magazine there. Then I realized after about 5 years that I was either going to stay there or I didn't really want to grow old in a culture that wasn't my own. I actually got sick, like I had to go to the emergency room one day. Then I started to think, I don't really want to grow old in a community that wasn't my own. So I ended up looking for a way to go back to the States. And a woman offered me a job, which was a half-time job in a gallery outside of New York City. And then she had just bought an old schoolhouse and converted it into studio space. So I got to do that and not have to work full time. That's where I met my husband. He was from Denmark and he had just come to the States to visit his brother. That's a whole funny story, but I won't go into it right now. And anyway, he was a potter by training, and then he also painted and made prints. And we met, and then a few years later, we ended up getting married, and that started a wonderful 25-year marriage and partnership where we created an unconventional lifestyle and business. I really thank him for my rich life. He encouraged me not to take another job, not to take a teaching job, but just stick to my guns with the art. I'm sure that I would have gone a safer route if it hadn't been with his encouragement. And I'm really glad I did that because teaching is a full-time profession unto itself. And a lot of people take that route, and then it's hard to have the energy to do both things. So I really thank him a lot for that. And in the end, we ended up finding a way to make a good living. Aside from doing our own work, we actually collaborated together. These are two pieces that we did. First one is in a condominium in White Plains, New York, and the second one is in a conference room in a law firm in Palo Alto. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my own inspiration and my techniques and everything for art. First of all, I don't think very much when I paint. I could be in a studio with a friend visiting me or whatever, and I can have a full conversation with her and paint and have neither of those things interfere with each other. I'm a very intuitive painter, and in a way, it really doesn't go through my brain what's coming out of me. It's almost like it's flowing through me. And it's not to say I don't have any idea what I'm doing, but sometimes I work in series, so I do sometimes have a vague idea, but I also like to just totally play around and let whatever unfolds, unfold. And in a way, at the beginning I was worried it won't look like me or whatever, but it always ends up looking like me in some way or another. And I think in a way that's the way kids make art. They really don't think, they just sit and express themselves when they're younger. When they get a little older, that's when trouble begins. But Picasso said every child's an artist, the problem is how to remain an artist once he or she grows up. And I totally agree with that. I prefer personally most kids' work to most adults' work. And when someone says my kid could do that, which I've heard a few times, I take it as the highest compliment. These are some pieces I call my mandala pieces, a theme that I think fits very well in the ranch. A mandala is a visual representation of a spiritual journey, starting from the outside to the inner core through layers. The inspiration for these paintings was actually a drawing I did as a kid. My parents had saved a bunch of my drawings, and when we cleaned out their house, I found a drawing similar to this, and I actually copied myself. Here's another in that series. I love this piece, and this one has a lot of writing on the back. It was just really free writing, automatic writing. Acrylic paint lends itself to layering. It can look very plasticky if you just use one layer. So if I know I'm going to do a green painting, I might start with red. Or I might just randomly put colors on there. I always use a lot of collage elements. I like the change of texture. And then I use, things like vintage images from children's books, fabric, and sometimes I'll even take something off a billboard in New York or whatever. There's subject matter that you'll find over and over again in my work, my vocabulary, so to speak. Many of these images have been with me since I was a child. For example, trees, moons, birds, animals. And by the way, these animals here, you can see them right here. Everybody can choose one print and take home with you when you go home today. So these are collaborative I did with my husband. The original is on a Mexican bark paper. And these are little prints, as I said. And we have over 100 different images. A lot of houses, flowers, more flowers. And my workshops this week on Monday through Thursday from 11 to 12:30 are going to be group projects kind of exploring the flora and fauna of the ranch and then working on a group project together with flowers. And we'll do different layering and images of them. And we're going to switch places with each other so that nobody gets embarrassed or worried about, oh, they're not good enough. So it's like a little like musical art. I always have stripes in my work and polka dots. I love them. This is probably my most popular type of painting. I call it my yellow spruce series, although it's not always yellow. I told the person to go buy those pillows, by the way. A lot of artists don't really care where their work hangs, but because I grew up in a Frank Lloyd Wright community, I'm interested not just in my art, but I see the room as an extension of my palette. And so I'm trying to create harmony in a home and a vibe of joy and happiness. And so I do care where my work hangs. And I also care about the size. I think that's important also. A lot of people have big walls, and it's pretty daunting how to go about buying art to put on a big wall if it's a little piece. So I think that matters as well. Anyway, these are more in the series, so you can sort of see how, even though they look similar, for me, it's like a step along the way, rather than a finished piece per se. A little bit like the way a writer writes page after page. A lot of stuff is based on childhood memories. I remember playing with paper doll cutouts and really loving that. I did a whole dress series. This painting was inspired by a show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Asian art, and I did my version of a bird scroll. Again, 2 different colorations of it. This is a home in East Hampton, New York, and that is my dentist, Dr. Hannon. And I traded these paintings for a lifetime of dental care. And I tell you, these both trades are great because everybody walks away feeling like they're winners. A lot of houses always, as I said. This is part of a floating house series. I have a few of those examples here. I split my time between New York City and Maine, and there was a house that got lifted up just down the street from where I was staying, and they were putting a foundation. So it really looked like the house was floating in midair. So it kind of inspired me to do a series of paintings based on that house. Houses and trees, what could be more iconic for, you know, just like the way kids really often do houses and trees. And I don't know if any of you guys have read The Hidden Life of Trees. It's such a cool book, and it really talks about how trees really communicate with each other. They warn each other of danger, they put out smells to talk to each other, they communicate underground with fungi and their root systems. Anyway, I'm really fascinated by trees. So here, sometimes they look great at the end of a hall, sometimes in a little grouping like that. So that was my husband. He was a very sweet soul. He would time his trips back to Denmark once or twice a year when those little flowers were in bloom. And he was a night person, and so he often prepared my canvases for me at night with gesso and molding paste, and they'd write me little love notes on them. And he sadly passed away in 2013. It's already a long time ago. Of an aneurysm. All of a sudden, he was visiting his sister in Denmark, and I just got a phone call. Afterwards, I started writing his name underneath the paintings that I was working on for the next period of time. His name was Geert. He hated his name because nobody could pronounce it. They always called him Gert. But anyway, and then that led me to realizing that I really liked the way the writing looked, and so I started writing quotes underneath a lot of my paintings, and then covering them up in a way like that. That's the quote from Rumi. Your thoughts are a veil on the face of the moon is your heart, and those thoughts cover your heart. So let them go, just let them fall into the water. And so here you can see how they're obscured, but it's just sort of a nice subliminal message to give myself and the viewer. Okay, so then everybody's life pretty much changed a lot during pandemic times. And I was isolated in my studio in New York City. A lot of my career was going into people's homes, and that was not possible anymore. I had a dream one night about my sister. She also sadly died in 2018. I haven't had a lot of death in my life, but I feel like it cracked me open in many, many ways. Not that I would wish anyone to die like that. Two main people in my life. But anyway, I woke up after a dream of hers, and I just thought, I'm gonna paint a portrait of her. I had given her that jacket, and she loved that jacket so much. And then that's her little dog. This is a little, I don't know if you guys know Myra Common, she's an illustrator, but I kind of did it a la Myra Common at the beginning. The funny thing is that before, I never put people in my art at all. And when people said, how come you never put people in your art? And I said, I avoid them like the plague. The plague came. It's true, really. So then all of a sudden I'd wake up in the morning and I'd see her portrait on there, and it was like she was in my studio. And so I decided I'm going to paint everybody that I love, whether they're alive or dead, that's not around me now. And so I did a series of about 20 portraits. That's my dad on the left with his iconic bow tie. That's my daughter when she was 3, and that was her, she got a teddy bear backpack, and that's her teddy bear Pocahontas. She got a little shopping cart. That's my daughter all grown up, and that thing around her waist is sort of based on that Degas ballerina with the tutu, which I always loved as a kid. And then that's my Uncle Stan, who sadly just died a few months ago. That's the sign over there. He was a car fanatic, and that's the logo of a lotus. That's my husband. I started off being more abstract, and then I got more literal as they got tighter, these portraits. And this one hangs in my house, and it startles me sometimes at first when I saw it, I didn't think it was him per se, but I thought it was a person.
Wait, Pam, tell them how big those are.
Oh yeah, they're all 7 feet tall, by the way.
No.
Oh yeah, I forgot to do that. Kathy's my friend, and she keeps me in line. Anyway, it was the time of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm very political. I was feeling really guilty that I wasn't going out to any of the protest marches, so I decided to make these portraits. These are not 7 feet tall, and they ended up, and thinking that maybe I could make them into posters. So they ended up going, I sent them to a lot of friends who were active in different cities. This is in Palo Alto, but people hold them in Minneapolis and Washington, D.C., in a few different places in California, New York City. These are lawn signs from a house in Oakland, California. And then during the Biden-Harris campaign, somebody had the idea of asking me to do this Biden-Harris one. I'm not wild about this one, but I will say that it was the most well-attended art show I ever had. I had he made 250 of them indivisible in Maine, and they were all over Maine. And so I'd be driving along, there's one. Okay, now I'm just gonna say a few words. I sort of touched on it a minute ago about how I approach the business of art. 2 artists, two kids to support, not born rich, not the smartest thing I ever did to marry another artist. And we had to find a way. This is where innovation, confidence, and practicality came into play. Although we were lucky enough to get included in many gallery shows and sold well, we never really were able to get ahead in using that gallery model. Because after you stretch and frame everything, it costs money to do that. And then, because we traveled back and forth to Europe all the time, well, what are we gonna do, unstretch and unframe everything? So it just wasn't practical for us to work like that. And the other thing, which was kind of a nice accident, is we always push-pinned our canvases raw on the wall, because I never liked the bounce of like when you have a stretched canvas, it's not a hard surface behind. So we just push-pinned, and then when you get to be, older, to store everything, you need like a warehouse. So this was very practical. We had kind of a practical approach to a lot of things. The left hand, that's us traveling, sold a lot of our work in California. That was my assistant, Ellen, she was great. And this was us getting ready to get on a plane. And a lot of schlepping involved. Those are tubes, there are about 10 paintings in each one. And over here, I took a lot of these in one ski bag, which I finally figured out was a good way to do it. Anyway, our concept was basically the Tupperware model. We ended up being hosted by people. People would offer to host us. We would offer them a piece of art in exchange for doing that. And we would show the work on the floor, like Persian carpets. And people would gather around. People would have a party, like a brunch or a cocktail party or something like that. And we'd show the canvases like this, like Persian carpets. And then people, most of the time people wouldn't buy right outright like that, but they would say, could you come to my house? And we'd make appointments privately, and we'd go and hold things up and have a look and see what something looks like. So that was really the model we used. We even had some outside. The strangest place ever was I met somebody in I think it was Palo Alto, and I ended up, she was like, couldn't I see? And I ended up showing her stuff on the sidewalk. That was crazy. And here you see how we would hold things up and really, get to have people buy the right size paintings for their wall. And that's a good rule to know. If you have a big wall and it's a vertical, it's very hard to make something horizontal look good on it. And it also enhances the architecture when you take that into account. So that when you have a vertical piece that doesn't fill exactly wall to wall, but is large, it actually brings the ceiling up. And so I care about that. Just holding things up like that. One time I had a show in a place, and we were looking for a piece in the bathroom, and then we came out and we were doing something else, and then afterwards I said, "Where's the bathroom?" It was one of my more embarrassing moments. Anyway, I wanted to just show this part here because this is interesting, because during the pandemic, we really had, our model was just over because we couldn't go into people's homes. So I figured out a way to work virtually with people. So this was a client in Massachusetts who had a very big wall, and they were looking for something. They had seen a painting of mine in Seattle at their friend's house. They called me up and said, "We have this really big wall." And so I said, "Take a picture straight on so that I can superimpose different possibilities on that wall." And so I did. This is just sort of to show you what the process. So the first one, they picked these paintings from my website. The yellow one, it's a beautiful piece, but it looked washed out. This one here, it was too horsey, it was too tall. And that was like a nice, elegant horizontal shape, and it wasn't doing anything there. And then this one was more the right shape, and it also really brought out the warmth of the room, I think. And then this one, we decided was really the right size, but not the right coloration. So they ended up commissioning me to do a piece for that spot, and in the coloration of the one we liked. And they also, I take it as a challenge when I do a commission. I'll never, do things that are not in my vocabulary, let's say. And, but I take the challenge of having people, give me things that matter to them. And because I use a lot of collage elements anyway, I can insert people's letters that mean something to them, or fabric, let's say a kid's dress that they loved, or a dress they loved as a kid, or anyway. So this is what it ended up looking like in the spot. And you can see, I take the architecture into context. See the window, it's designed to be that same height as that. Okay, so now I'm almost done. I hope I'm not boring you guys too much. Anyway, I'm kind of, my dad was like this also. We both really like to share things. If he had something that he liked to eat, he was like, "You gotta try it." And so I'm kind of the same way. And during the pandemic, I was by myself, isolated, and I started a blog, and it ended up being a blog on Substack. And so I write every week 3 things that are inspirational to me, and I have very eclectic taste, and I'm very curious about lots of things. So I include everything from playlists to animal stories to recipes. Well, here, those are more or less animals and stuff. And my blog is free. It comes out every Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. I'd love you guys, before you leave, to sign my mailing list. And if you want to be on the blog, you can just say blog or something like that. And you can always unsubscribe if you don't want to get it. But I think I love doing it. It's a labor of love. And I'm always excited by everything I write about. Okay, I'm just going to end with a few kind of things that I think they like us to wrap things up in a bowl in a way. So these are some things. Consider the enormous influence your environment plays on your mood and spirit. Common knowledge and common ways of doing things are not always the way. In fact, they're often not the way, in my opinion. Believe in yourself and try and make your inner voice speak to you as you would to a friend. Very important. We're floating in empty space in a universe that goes on forever. If you have to be here, at least be happy and enjoy the experience. That was Michael Singer. I don't know if any of you have read him, but I found him pretty interesting. Every day is an opportunity to create something. Art isn't just something on a wall, it's a way of life. And, I want to read something to you. This is advice from Kurt Vonnegut. In 2006, a high school English teacher asked students to write to a famous author and ask for advice. Kurt Vonnegut was the only one to respond, and his response is magnificent. Dear Xavier High School and Miss Lockwood and Mr. Perrin, blah, 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 I thank you for your friendly letters. You sure know how to cheer up an old geezer, 84, in his sunset years. I don't make public appearances anymore because I now resemble nothing so much as an iguana. What I had to say to you, moreover, would not take long to write. Practice any art, music, singing, dancing, acting, drawing, painting, sculpting, poetry, fiction, essays, reportage, no matter how well or badly. Not to get money and fame, but to experience becoming, to find out what's inside you to make your soul grow. Seriously, I mean starting right now, do art and do it for the rest of your lives. Draw a funny or nice picture of Miss Lockwood and give it to her. Dance home after school and sing in the shower and on and on. Make a face in your mashed potatoes. Pretend you're Count Dracula. Here's an assignment for you tonight, and I hope Miss Lockwood will flunk you if you don't do it. Write a 6-line poem about anything but rhymed. No fair tennis without a net. Make it as good as you possibly can, but don't tell anybody what you're doing. Don't show it or recite it to anybody, not even your girlfriend or parents or whatever, or Miss Lockwood, okay? Tear it up into teeny-weeny pieces and discard them into widely separated trash receptacles. You will find that you have already been gloriously rewarded for your poem. You have experienced becoming, learned a lot more about what's inside you, and you have made your soul grow. God bless you all. Okay, I'm going to speed through this because this is about a workshop I did before in the art room. And then I'm going to show you, this is the last thing here. So when my husband died, and it was so sudden and everything, he had always wanted to do a line of products related to our art, and we just didn't get to it. And so after he died, I, number one, put together a traveling exhibit of his art because I was determined that he was going to live on through his art, and it was very therapeutic for me. But I also decided to launch a line of products mostly based on his art. And that's what some of these products are out here. And I just thought it would be fun to show them to you today. Most of them, as I said, are paintings of stuff that are pieces of our paintings. And then these animal giclée prints, as I said, are collaborative, and I'd like everybody to take one home with you. And these little frames there, those you can buy at IKEA if you have an IKEA near you. They're like cheap, $7.99 or something. Used to be $4.99. But they pop right in, and they look nice. I think they're pretty decent frames. And here you see how people have displayed them in different ways. And then now, if anybody has any questions, I'm done with my talk.